Hi there, this is Scott Bradfield. This is CityLit's novel writing course, the second to penultimate week almost, or it is the penultimate week of our 11-week course. And this is what I wanted to talk about today was a subject that often comes up in classes, which is, we've talked about basic techniques of a novel and what the novel is in a very simple way. And what I am trying to impress upon you is one thing as writers. It doesn't matter what I tell you, and it doesn't matter what your teachers tell you. Ultimately, what you want to write are the novels you enjoy to read. And when you leave this class, you're going to go off and continue reading books. And there's no answer to how do you end a book. There's no answer to what point of view should I use. There's no answer to when should I experiment with a novel. The only answer is what do you enjoy reading, and you'll probably want to write books that you enjoy reading. That having been said, the novel is extremely various. I mean, you can see a few random books here. My house is filled with books. I love novels. There's millions and millions of them out there in the world, and there's lots of ways to write novels. We've been emphasizing the basic techniques, which I'm arguing are endemic in every novel. If you don't understand point of view, the answer is not to just run all over the map and just tell anything you feel like telling. You need to establish your own rules of point of view, and then you might see very experimental novels, such as, well, there's a strange writer in England called B.S. Johnson, who has a very interesting, weird, disconnected sense of point of view. Narrative time, B.S. Johnson. Page by Page is a famous book by him called Box, where you take each page, and there's several hundred pages, and you put them into a box in any order you want to read them, and you read one page after another. I would argue that even in an experimental writer like B.S. Johnson, you're still seeing the elemental rules or techniques being applied of time passing in the pages, time passing in the sentences, and certain notions of point of view which are consistent. So you might have something very difficult, such as the omniscient point of view, but when a writer begins that technique, they follow through with it, and they just don't shift willy-nilly anytime they feel like it. So I'm asking you to understand those techniques. I thought I'd just look through just some of the books that are often considered experimental and suggest to you that however experimental they are, they're still relying on these basic techniques. So a book called The Dead Father. This is a very funny novel by an American writer called Donald Barthelme. And it's in a very surreal world, and it's about a man carrying his dead father to his burial. And the dead father is continually talking and is one of the characters in the story. And the passages progress in a very surrealistic, comic, weird, nightmarish way. But all of the techniques of time and point of view are consistent. And that's why the book sort of works. Is however strange the book is, it has to have something for the reader to hang on to. One of the most famous and well-known experimental novelists in America, Thomas Pynchon. Most people know Gravity's Rainbow and V, which are quite experimental in the way they describe worlds, in the way they incorporate history into a kind of fantastic landscape. But look at one of my favorite Thomas Pynchon novels, and this is something you might want to read over the holidays. It's called Inherent Vice. It's a detective novel. It has one very consistent point of view, an aging detective named Doc Sportello, and it takes place sequentially, even while history is involved in it, and the past, and what Doc and his friends have been doing over the past 20 years are recounted. All of these techniques are still following through in this novel, however rich and complicated and experimental it is. So the style of this novel is very rich, very different from many books you may be used to, but even when they're experimenting, many novelists have to maintain these basic techniques. One of my favorite novels, I don't recommend rushing out to read it, J.R. by William Gaddis. Huge, fat book. You can see really tiny print. This is a book that does play around quite a bit with point of view. We're never really in anybody's head in this book. We sort of follow everyone around. We move from one character to another. We're never inside them. We're always hearing them speak. However, he establishes this technique early in the book. It's a radical, fairly experimental technique. And it's late in his career. It's not his first book. It's his most experimental book. And then he follows through on the techniques he establishes early. He knows those techniques, and he follows through on them. Know your techniques. Know how you're telling your story. Another one of my favorites, just so you don't think I'm trying to just get you to write just conventional fiction, because I don't know what conventional fiction means. 3 novels, 3 fairly disconnected novels by Beckett. Very grim picture there. Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnameable. The first 2 books are very strange experimental novels. Techniques are still consistent in them. And even when he drives that first-person narrator of Malloy down to the ground by the end of that book, time is operating clearly in a peculiar landscape. Point of view is consistent. He knows what he wants to do. And he starts off with a set of techniques, and he follows through with them. So, all I want you to learn. Another writer who's often considered experimental, many of you have been talking about this, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. You look at some of his early books, narratively, they're a bit experimental. Okay? His last book, his most recent novel, is narratively as consistent, a third-person point of view, as consistent in time and narrative time as I can think of any book being. All the techniques are there. An experimental novel, yes, but it's experimenting within the context of what the novel is. And I would close with two more books. We spoke a lot about Brian Moore, The Color of Blood this term. He does a number of things in this which I consider experimental. He doesn't just close his eyes or heterotext or chop his novel up into pieces and paste it together in a kind of William Burroughs collage, but he experiments with what the novel can do. He creates a world, a country that doesn't exist. It's roughly based on a country that might exist, but it's not entirely that country. He creates an almost fantastic landscape. He makes it as real as possible. He maintains close third-person point of view throughout. You won't see many novelists pull that off. From first page to the last page. That, to me, is an experiment. Finally, another Brian Moore, one of my favorite. Moore was experimenting all over his career, as were all these other great writers we've mentioned and will mention. The Great Victorian Collection, very strange novel. It starts off with a man being interviewed on a videotape, and then it recounts the story of a man who has a dream that comes into the world. The dream that kind of breaks out of his dream and manifests itself in the world. A very experimental novel, very strange, wasn't at all appreciated when it was published, is a beautiful piece of novel writing, and is maintaining all of these techniques, is consistent with them, plays with them, invents new ways of telling stories, but is consistent and understands these basic premises from the start. So that's what I wanted to kind of close off the class. I'll say just a few concluding words next week. But go out and read all these great books. Don't read graphic novels. Graphic novels aren't novels. They don't have the same techniques available in them. They're doing different things. Movies aren't novels. Movies have nothing to do with novels. You could adapt movie techniques to your novels, but they aren't the same thing. Read novels, and read the good novel writers today. There's plenty of them, and that's where you'll learn all the stuff you need to know. Okay, thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week. Keep writing. Bye.